I'm going to talk about my experiences in trying to build AI for medicine. I am an MD and a PhD. I don't practice medicine, and hopefully you will see why in this talk. Very proud of my conflicts of interest. I've worked with a lot of different real healthcare institutions. And this is a talk about deep learning. I probably don't have to spend too much time since it's only 10 minutes, but suffice it to say, I learned in medical school, this is how we recognize things visually. Essentially, light hits the, anybody knows who this is? I might be able to teach you something on this. Any idea? This is Marie Curie, the only woman to win 2 Nobel Prizes, one in physics and one in chemistry, and is known as the mother of radiology. So the reason you know that is because light hits the cells of your retina, and they go through successive nested neural networks, honestly, in your brain for higher cognition until higher up in your cerebrum. You're going to remember that this is Marie Curie by the end of this talk. Google, Facebook, and other big companies have built the same thing sort of in digital perceptron space. We don't know how your brain works. We don't know how necessarily these neural networks work, but we know they work. That was demonstrated by this ImageNet competition. Most of you are probably aware. All this deep learning stuff started showing up in 2012, 2013. It shows that sort of rule-based procedural old school computer vision is far surpassed in terms of accuracy. Medicine paid attention. The first big sort of deep learning AI-driven image recognition was in diabetic retinopathy, where an ophthalmologist's job is to take this picture and predict 1 or 0, diabetic retinopathy or not. You can see, I just want to highlight the numbers. There's 128,000 images. So to get this kind of accuracy. And based on the ROC, you can see each of these is an ophthalmologist making a prediction of 1 or 0 on some test set. Everybody except this guy, the algorithm beat. Stanford did something similar with melanoma, predicting cancer from a mole. We can talk about why this is not clinically relevant, but the proof is in the pudding that at least it's a proof of concept that this is going to work. It's not clinically relevant because there's not 120-something thousand biopsy confirmed melanoma images. That's why this is not that relevant. And my group was fortunate enough to train a deep learning model to predict Alzheimer's, to segregate Alzheimer's from mild cognitive dementia. Now, mind you, a neurologist can't segregate Alzheimer's from mild cognitive dementia, but on this special type of MRI, we were able to show that our model can find Alzheimer's 7 years earlier than regular, than a human interpreting this FDG PET. Anyhow, so all kinds of interesting things. They all require big data. The biggest data you're going to find in medicine that has to do with imaging is in radiology. And this is the last 20 years of imaging. 5,000 different reports have been logged at this. UCSF is the institution I came from in San Francisco. I want you to focus on the yellow. Yellow is mammograms. Mammograms are for breast cancer risk. Before 2007, there are no mammograms yet. Mammography has been mandated by Congress actually since the 80s. Any idea what happened before 2007? Since you don't have time, I'll just tell you they threw it away. They threw away all of that good data, which is interesting because this graph shows the size of tumor X size of surgery, right? So if mammography was introduced in the 80s, you would expect large tumors to decrease compensatorily, right? But no, you have a large increase in excisions of small tumors, and big tumors are not being caught. So clearly mammography hasn't had the effect we expected it to. And it's because you're asking a resident or somebody like me to look at this low resolution picture of 2 breasts, 2 views, and predict early cancer. It's very, very difficult for radiologists. It really is an art. And you can look at the numbers here. They're not that bad, but cumulatively, it's a big deal. Any 1% change in any of these numbers is hundreds of thousands of women. So, this data exists. Doctors use it for an N of 1 usually, hopefully, just the patients. N of 2 if they get sued and they have to go to court. But I want to use all of it in aggregate. So here are the images. There's about 1 million images. One of those graphs showed that for DICOMs, for breast imaging. And there's a whole bunch of radiology reports over the last 20 years, 166,000 of them. So one report can go to many images. And for a subset that is suspicious, there's actually surgery and pathology that goes along with it. This is kind of how those numbers line up. The task is to read this. This is a real pathology note. And label, left, right, cancer, not cancer on the images. right? So needless to say, we trained NLP to do that because we didn't have 30,000, we didn't have time to read 30,000 notes. And for many reasons, this NLP works very well. So it's 100% accurate for what we needed it to do. We published that. That's not the only thing you need to train NLP for at a large scale when you use routine data. They have to calibrate the machine, right? So this is how you calibrate a machine. This is not useful for deep learning cancer, but we have to screen these kind of images out. So we also train models of image curation to sort of automatically screen that out. We published that. After you do all of that, you pretty much are ended up with an algorithm that can read real time, right? So here is a typical algorithm of how patients might show up. Screening on the first of the year, a diagnostic follow-up in February. It's obviously suspicious because there's a fine needle aspiration that goes to pathology. We can read that. There's a lumpectomy that's curative done in March. We can read that and go back and label these images with what the pathology actually is. The worst of these two, ductal carcinoma in situ versus invasive ductal carcinoma. You label it with the worst. And if you do that, you get data sets that look like this, that this group can probably use very easily, right? So here's negative and positive pathology, and here are the numbers. So I have 700,000 odd ones and zeros now, images labeled by ones and zeros that I could train in a deep learning. Suffice it to say it worked, right? You stick it in there, the labels you read are accurate. So this works, big deal. How do we know, it's just not 1 and 0. That pathology report there's a long tail of the distribution of outcomes, right? So we're interested in this. This is the good stuff, but ultimately we can extrapolate. This is called an ontology, and NLP out whatever we want. Before I left UCSF, I was the only person that knew there were 90,000 pathology slides somewhere that somebody else could probably go deep learn on. Now what? How do I know it works? So this was trained at UCSF. It's in San Francisco. It's Asian, a heavily Asian demographic, heavily Caucasian demographic, high socioeconomic status. How do I know it's going to work? And this is one of the problems. Well, we sort of have to, much like AI and regular image recognition, you have tons of data that you can validate things on, collected from various sources, all over ImageNet, all over various sources. That doesn't exist in medicine because of privacy laws like HIPAA and high tech. There's not a talk about HIPAA and high tech, but suffice it to say, those same privacy laws give us access to this data. They're paying companies lots of money to make this data available. If you go on your iPhone, you can sign up for your Apple medical records. Health Gorilla are the people through HL7 that make that possible, so I can go read my medical records. If you're a doctor and you want a second opinion, you go through a company like Nautilus Medical to get that image sent from any machine you read x-rays on to any other machine you read x-rays on. It's like its own internet. This has existed for 20 years, these type of standards. So, clinically, any doctor can get EHR and imaging. So we built a research study around these technologies. This is how images are sent peer-to-peer, basically a BitTorrent from one peer to another. There are health information exchanges that some of these big EHR providers provide. Health Gorilla is a company that's an intermediate in these healthcare exchanges, and we can get data from them, suffice it to say. So once we can get data, then we can automate the process I showed you before that we did at UCSF. COVID hit, obviously. Why not go get COVID? We know there's a lot of x-rays for that. So we built this app on that platform technology that I showed you. Patients can keep their imaging. How many people have had x-rays and actually have a copy of that x-ray to show me today? I would assume none of you. Physicians can curate that imaging, and med students, more importantly, since I work in a medical school, and epidemiologists can ask questions on this platform. It's really all you need. And suffice it to say, the data that exists today, this is the open data for COVID. And it's garbage, absolutely garbage. It might look good if you hit run in a deep learning algorithm, but 60% of COVID cases are asymptomatic. That's what you need to predict. And it's not even a label available today. So suffice it to say, there is great need for this type of mechanism where you can leverage existing frameworks, IRB, HIPAA, high tech, all that good stuff. So we're launching this COVID-19 Everything study. I'm very proud that we finally got IRB approval. And we have everybody sort of lined up to do this kind of thing right. It's very different that when I did my Ph.D. in genomics, we had large de-identified data sets. They seem to be everywhere with very little risk to privacy. That's fine, but for AI, we need that same kind of data, but collected in the real world. Genomics is fine, everything's perfect, it's all aligned now. X-rays, pathology, notes, none of this stuff is perfect. And we really need large-scale Facebook ad campaigns, which we're about to launch, to try to entice people to sign up and give us their data. Just sort of to close with some philosophy, I guess. You know, this approach puts, everybody on this call has probably heard of human in the loop, but we want to put patients in the loop, because if you put patients in the loop, you can run essentially clinical trials. But like I said, I work in a medical school. There are only 185 medical schools in this country. Yet there are thousands of startups that are building AI supposedly to cure medicine. Few of them, if any, are associated with the medical school, and all of them, more likely than not, are going to fail because you have no data to validate anything that you're going to build without these kind of approaches. And kind of to just wrap it up, you know, this is, you know, medicine is kind of like autonomous driving. Tesla showed this 2 or 3 years ago, and it really is how they were going to drive to zero fault tolerance, their autonomous driving program. And much like medicine, there's a long tail of the distribution. The input for Tesla's deep learning is 6 cameras on 1 million Teslas, I guess. If something happens, they go back, they look at these 6 cameras, they figure out what went wrong, why you left with, you know, why you went left instead of right, why you accelerated instead of decelerated, and they relabel the entire data set. Store it up in a unit test, and that error never happens again, supposedly. Well, that sounds a lot like medicine. We have all kinds of data. Why does it have to be just Tesla cameras? We have a ton of data that if we can curate and label, we could do that with for radiology, we could do it for pathology, we could do it for genomics. And again, with the patient being at the center of this idea, of this data engine, if you will, this field Tesla speak, we can run very large scale clinical trials, really from apps. And I think with that, I hope I'm not over 10 minutes, but 12 minutes, sorry. Thank you, everybody. I'm the PI of the Hadley Lab, and we need computer scientists to help us to crunch all this data really to make medicine great again. So please let me know if you're interested. Thank you.